The dust cloud on the horizon grew larger as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the Colorado plains. Beth Morrison squinted against the glare, her calloused hand shading her eyes as she watched the approaching wagon. No one ever came to the Broken Arrow Ranch anymore, not since word had spread about her condition. Decent folk had decided she wasn't fit company for their families. At 28, Beth had resigned herself to a life of solitude. The doctors in Denver had been brutally clear 5 years ago she would never bear children. The fever that had nearly killed her had left its mark in ways that couldn't be seen but were felt every day. The hollow ache in her chest when she saw mothers with their babies, in the pitying looks from married women in town, in the way men who might have once courted her now looked right through her as if she were already a ghost. The wagon drew closer, and Beth could make out the driver, a weathered man in a dusty coat, his face grim with the weight of whatever errand had brought him to her remote ranch. Behind him, barely visible in the wagon bed, she glimpsed something that made her heart skip a beat. "Miss Morrison?" the driver called as he pulled his horses to a stop near the porch. His voice carried the careful formality of a man delivering bad news. That's right. Beth descended the porch steps, her worn boots crunching on the packed earth. "What can I do for you, Mr. Hartley?" Jim Hartley from the Territorial Children's Aid Society. He climbed down from the wagon, moving with the stiffness of a man who'd been traveling for days. "I'm afraid there's been a mix-up with our records." Beth's heart began to race. She'd heard of the Children's Aid Society they placed orphaned, children with families willing to take them in. But why were they here? She'd never applied to take in a child. The very thought was too painful, a constant reminder of what she could never have herself. "I think you have the wrong ranch, Mr. Hartley." "I never requested, that's the mix-up," Hartley interrupted, pulling a crumpled paper from his coat pocket. "Our records show a B. Morrison at the Broken Arrow Ranch requesting placement of a child. We assumed it was Benjamin Morrison." Beth felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Benjamin Morrison died 3 years ago. He was my brother." Hartley's face went pale. "Oh, Lord." "Then you single quotes Rod Bodderson, Benjamin's sister." Beth's voice was steady, but inside she felt like she was falling. "And you've brought me a child who was meant for a family that no longer exists." From the wagon bed came a small sound, a whimper, soft and heartbroken. Beth moved closer despite herself, her heart clenching as she saw what lay hidden beneath the canvas tarp. A little boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, sat huddled in the corner of the wagon bed. His clothes were clean, but patched. His dark hair tousled from the journey, but it was his eyes that stopped Beth, cold, large, brown, and filled with such profound sadness that she had to grip the wagon's side to keep from falling. "Hello there," she said softly, her voice catching in her throat. The boy looked up at her, and she saw hope flicker in his expression before being quickly suppressed, as if he'd learned not to trust in good things. "This is Timothy," Hartley said heavily. "His parents died of consumption 6 months ago. He's been in our temporary care facility in Denver waiting for placement." The records indicated that B. Morrison had specifically requested a boy of Timothy's age. Beth felt tears prick her eyes. Benjamin had been married for only 2 years when he died, and his wife had passed shortly after from grief and heartbreak. They'd talked often about having children, about filling the ranch house with laughter and love. Had he written to the Children's Aid Society before his death? It would have been just like her gentle, optimistic brother to plan for a future he'd never lived to see. "What happens now?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Hartley shifted uncomfortably. "Well, Miss Morrison, I'm afraid the situation is complicated. We can't place Timothy with an unmarried woman. Society regulations, you understand. I'll have to take him back to Denver and try to find another family willing to take him, no?" Word burst from Beth's lips with such force that both Hartley and Timothy jumped. She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't meant to feel such fierce protectiveness for a child she'd known for only minutes. But looking at Timothy's small, resigned face, she knew she couldn't let him be carted away like an unwanted package. "I mean," she said more quietly, trying to control the desperation in her voice, "surely there must be some alternative. Boy has been through enough upheaval." I'm sorry, Miss Morrison. The rules are clear. It's an unmarried woman, particularly one living alone in such an isolated location. Hartley trailed off, his meaning clear. Beth's mind raced. There had to be something she could do. She looked at Timothy again, saw the way his small hands gripped the edge of the wagon bed, as if preparing to be torn away from yet another potential. Home. How long do I have? She asked suddenly. I beg your pardon before you have to take him back. Surely you and your horses need rest before making the return journey. Hartley consulted a pocket watch. Suppose we could stay the night. My horses are tired and there's a storm brewing to the west. Then stay, Beth said firmly. Both of you. I'll prepare rooms and a hot meal. You can discuss Timothy's situation. Properly in the morning, she saw protest forming on Hartley's lips and quickly added, It's the Christian thing to do, Mr. Hartley. You wouldn't want to travel in a storm with a child in your care. Hartley sighed. Very well, one night. But Miss Morrison, please don't make this harder than it has to be. The boy needs a proper family, mother and a father who can provide for him. As if summoned by those words, another dust cloud appeared. On the horizon, Beth's heart sank. More visitors were the last thing she needed right now. But as the rider drew closer, she recognized the familiar silhouette and felt her pulse quicken for an entirely different reason. Daniel. Garrett rode his black stallion with the easy grace of a man born in the saddle. At 35, he was the most successful rancher in the territory and the most eligible bachelor. Despite his well-known declaration that he would never marry or have children, he was also the man who had been haunting Beth's dreams for the past 2 years, ever since he'd helped her through a particularly brutal winter. When half her cattle had been killed in a blizzard, Daniel was handsome in the rugged way of frontier. Mental and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and green eyes, the color of prairie grass. But it was his unexpected gentleness that had captured Beth's heart. The way he'd sat with her through long, cold nights when her prize mare was foaling. The way he'd fixed her barn roof without being asked and refused payment. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, with something that might have been longing in his eyes. Not that it mattered. Daniel Garrett had made it clear that he had no interest in marriage or family, and Beth had learned to accept that their friendship was all it would ever be. Beth, Daniel called as he dismounted, his gaze taking in the wagon and its occupants. Everything all. Right here, Mr. Garrett? Hartley interjected before Beth could answer. Perhaps you could talk sense into Miss Morrison. There's been a mistake with our records, and she seems reluctant to accept the reality of the situation. Daniel's eyes found Beth's, and she saw understanding pass between them. He'd always been able to read her moods, to know when she was hurting. Even when she tried to hide it. What kind of mistake? Daniel asked quietly. Beth quickly explained the situation, watching Daniel's face as she spoke. When she mentioned Timothy, Daniel's gaze went to the little boy still sitting quietly in the wagon bed. Hello, son, Daniel said gently, approaching the wagon. I'm Daniel. What's your name? Timothy, the boy whispered, the first word he'd spoken since arriving. That's a fine name. Are you hungry, Timothy? I bet Miss Beth here could rustle up some cookies if you asked nicely. For the first time, Timothy's face showed a spark of interest. Cookies? The best cookies in Colorado, Daniel assured him, glancing at Beth with a slight smile that made her heart flutter despite everything. Well, Hartley said, clearly uncomfortable with the developing scene. I suppose if we're staying the night, Are, Beth said firmly, all of you. Timothy, would you like to see the ranch? I have some horses that might like to meet you. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Beth prepared rooms while Daniel helped Timothy out of the wagon and showed him around the ranch. Hartley retired early with a book and a bottle of whiskey, leaving Beth and Daniel to tuck Timothy into bed in the small room that had once belonged to Beth's brother. Will you tell me a story? Timothy asked, as Beth pulled the quilt up to his chin. Beth's throat tightened. What kind of story would you like? About horses, Timothy said immediately. Beth told him about her favorite mare. Sunshine, and how she'd saved Beth's life during a terrible storm. As she spoke, Timothy's eyes grew heavy, and soon he was asleep. his small face peaceful for the first time since he'd arrived. Daniel was waiting for her on the porch when she emerged from the house, his large frame silhouetted against the star-filled sky. "He's a good boy," Daniel said quietly. "Yes, he is." Beth settled into the chair beside him, acutely aware of his presence in the darkness. "Daniel, I don't know what to do." "What do you want to do?" The simple question hung in the air between them. What did she want? She wanted to keep Timothy, to give him the love and security he'd lost when his parents died. She wanted to hear his laughter ringing through the ranch house, to teach him to ride and rope and read. She wanted to be the mother she'd never be, able to be to a child of her own blood. But wanting something and being able to have it were two very different things. "I want to keep him," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Hartley's right. Yeah. An unmarried woman with no family. Who would approve such a placement?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "What if you weren't unmarried?" Beth's heart stopped. "What? What if you had a husband? A family name that carried weight in the territory?" Beth stared at him in the darkness, hardly daring to breathe. "Daniel, what are you saying?" "I'm saying marry me, Beth." The words hit her like a physical blow. She dreamed of hearing them so many times, but never like this. Never as a practical solution to an impossible problem. "You don't mean that?" she whispered. "I do." Daniel turned in his chair to face her, his green eyes intense even in the starlight. "Beth, I've watched you with injured animals, seen how you care for anything that needs help. You'd be a wonderful mother to that boy, but you don't want children. You've said so 100 times. I said I didn't want children of my own." His voice was carefully controlled. "This is different." Beth felt tears burning her eyes. He was offering her everything she wanted: Timothy, security, respectability, and it would mean nothing because it wouldn't be based on love, at least not the kind of love she felt for him. "Daniel, I can't ask you to sacrifice your freedom. For you're not asking, I'm offering." He reached over and took her hand, his touch sending warmth shooting up her arm. "We're good friends, Beth. We work well together. We could make this arrangement work." Arrangement. The word cut through her heart like a knife. But when she thought of Timothy's small face, of the hope that had flickered in his eyes when she'd spoken gently to him, she knew she would do anything, even enter into a loveless marriage to give him the home he needed. "The people in town would talk," she said weakly. "Let them talk. By the time the paperwork is processed and official, we'll be married, and Timothy will be our son. No one will be able to dispute it, and after. When Timothy is grown and doesn't need us anymore," Daniel's hand tightened on hers. "That when it comes, for now, all that matters is giving that boy a home." Beth closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Daniel, there's something you should know about why I never married, about why the doctors say." "I know about your condition, Beth." Her eyes flew open. "You know? Doc Pattison mentioned it after your fever broke 5 years ago. He was worried about your state of mind." Beth felt heat flood her cheeks. "Then you know I can never give you children of your own." "I told you, I don't want children of my own." Daniel's voice was firm. "But I'm discovering I do want to be Timothy's father. And your husband." Before Beth could respond, a cry from inside the house broke the spell between them.
"Oh."
Timothy was calling for her, his voice thick with tears. They both rushed inside to find the little boy sitting up in bed, his face streaked with tears. "I had a bad dream," he sobbed, as Beth gathered him into her arms. "I dreamed you sent me away." "Oh, sweetheart," Beth murmured, her heart breaking. "It was just a dream." But the man said, "I have to go back. Because you're not married, are you? Going to send me away? Beth looked over Timothy's head at Daniel, who was standing in the doorway with an expression she'd never seen before. Pain and longing mixed with fierce determination. No one is sending you anywhere, Daniel said, firmly entering the room. Beth and I are getting married, Timothy. You're going to stay right here with us. Timothy pulled back from Beth's embrace, his eyes wide. Really? You're going to be my mama and papa? Beth felt tears streaming down her face. If you want us to be, I want it more than anything, Timothy whispered, throwing his arms around both of them. Over Timothy's head, Beth met Daniel's eyes. She saw her own tears reflected there, along with something else, something that looked almost like love. The wedding took place 3 days. Later in the small church in Cedar Falls, word had spread quickly through the town about the rushed ceremony, and speculation ran rampant. But when Beth walked down the aisle in her simple blue dress, with Timothy beside her as their witness and Daniel waiting at the altar in his best suit, she found she didn't care what anyone thought. What mattered was the way Daniel's eyes never left her face, the gentle way he spoke his vows, and the fierce joy on Timothy's face when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. The kiss Daniel gave her was brief and sweet, more promise than passion. But Beth felt something stir in her chest. Hope, maybe. That this marriage might become more than just a convenient arrangement after the ceremony. They signed Timothy's adoption papers, officially making him Timothy Garrett. Hartley seemed relieved to have the situation resolved so neatly, though he shook his head over the unconventional nature of it all. Well, Mrs. Garrett, Daniel said as they stood on the church steps, Timothy between them, with his small hands clasped in theirs, ready to go home. Home. The word had never sounded so sweet. The first few weeks of their marriage settled into a comfortable routine. Daniel moved his belongings to the Broken Arrow Ranch, combining their herds and expanding the operation. Timothy blossomed under their care, his shy smiles becoming more frequent as he grew secure in their love. But Beth found herself struggling with feelings she'd never expected. Watching Daniel teach Timothy to ride, seeing him tuck their son into bed, each night witnessing his patience and kindness, it all made her love him more desperately than ever. And the knowledge that he'd married her only to help Timothy made it all the more painful. The crisis came on a cold October evening, 6 weeks after their wedding. Beth was preparing supper when she heard raised voices from the barn. The window, she could see Daniel and Timothy in heated discussion. I don't want to, Timothy was saying, his small face flushed with anger. You're not my real papa anyway. Beth's heart clenched as she saw Daniel's face go white. She rushed outside, arriving just as Timothy ran toward the house in tears. Timothy. Wait. She called, but the boy disappeared into the house, slamming the door behind him. Daniel stood frozen in the barn doorway, his face a mask of pain. What happened? Beth asked gently. I asked him to help me muck out the stalls, Daniel said, his voice hollow. He didn't want to, and when I insisted, he said I wasn't his real father. Daniel, he didn't mean it. He's just testing boundaries, the way children do, didn't he? Daniel turned to look at her, and Beth was shocked to see tears in his eyes. Maybe he's right. Maybe. I'm fooling myself thinking I could be a real father to him. That's not true, isn't it? Daniel's voice cracked. Beth, I don't know what I'm doing. I never had a father worth mentioning. I don't know how to discipline a child, how to be the man he needs me to be. Beth felt her heart breaking for this strong, capable man who doubted his worth as a father. Without thinking, she stepped closer and placed her hand on his chest. Daniel, you are exactly the father Timothy needs. You're patient and kind and loving. You've given him security and a home. That's what matters. But what if I fail him?
What?
If I'm not enough, then you'll try again tomorrow. That's what parents do. Daniel looked down at her, and Beth saw something shift in his expression. Is that what we are, Beth? Parents? Yes, she said softly. We're a family. Even though this marriage isn't, even though we don't. Even though, Beth confirmed, though her heart ached with all the things left unsaid, Daniel's hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his chest. Beth, There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said before we married. Pulse quickened. What is it? I didn't marry you just to help Timothy. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and fear. I don't understand, Beth whispered. I married you because I love you, Daniel said, his voice raw with emotion. I've loved you for 2 years, but I never said anything because I knew you wanted children, and I thought I could never give you what you needed. Beth felt the world shift beneath her feet. You love me? Any other children? There are dozens of orphans who need homes, Beth. We could fill this ranch with children who need love. It could be the family that takes in the ones nobody else wants. Beth's heart swelled with so much love and hope. She thought it might burst. Are you sure? It would be chaos, all those children. Beautiful chaos, Daniel said, pulling her into his arms. The kind of chaos that makes a house a home. When he kissed her, it was nothing like their brief wedding. Kiss. This kiss was full of passion and promise, of love finally acknowledged and dreams finally shared. They broke apart when they heard Timothy clearing his throat behind them. Are you two going to be mushy now? He asked, though his eyes were bright with happiness. Probably, Daniel said with a grin, ruffling Timothy's hair. Think you can put up with it, I guess, Timothy said with the air of one making a great sacrifice. Papa Daniel? Yes, son. I'm sorry I said you weren't my real papa. You are. You're the best papa ever. Daniel knelt down and pulled Timothy into a fierce hug. And you're the best son ever. I love you, Timothy. Love you too, Papa and Mama Beth. Yes, sweetheart. Can we get a dog? I think our family needs a dog. Beth laughed, looking at her husband, and sung her family and feeling more complete than she ever had in her life. I think a dog would be perfect. As they walked back to the house together, Timothy chattering about what kind of dog they should get, Beth felt Daniel's arm around her waist and knew that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as mistakes. The Children's Aid Society had sent Timothy to the wrong ranch, but he'd ended up exactly where he belonged. 6 months later, their family had grown by 3 more children siblings, aged 7, 9, and 11 who'd been separated by the system until Daniel and Beth stepped in to keep them together. The ranch house rang with laughter and the sound of running feet. The dog Timothy had wanted, a golden retriever named Sunshine, followed the children everywhere, patient and protective. Beth stood on the porch watching Daniel teach the older boys to rope while Timothy helped little Mary, the 7-year-old, pick wildflowers. Her hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, where their first biological child was growing, a miracle the doctors said would never happen, but which Beth attributed to the healing power of love and happiness. Penny for your thoughts, Daniel said, appearing beside her as he always seemed to when she was lost in contemplation. Just thinking about how different everything is from a year ago, Beth said, leaning into his embrace. If someone had told me then that I'd be married to you with 5 children and another on the way, ... Would you change anything? Daniel asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Beth looked out at their children because they were all their children now, regardless of blood, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. Not a single thing, she said softly. Not even the mistake that brought Timothy to us. It wasn't a mistake, Daniel said firmly. It was providence. God knew that boy belonged with us, just like he knew we belonged together. You think Benjamin knew? Beth asked suddenly. When he wrote to the Children's Aid Society, do you think he somehow knew what would happen? Daniel was quiet for a moment. I think your brother loved you enough to want you to have everything you deserved. Love, family, happiness. Maybe he did know in some way. As if summoned by their conversation about him, Timothy came running up to the porch, his arms full of wildflowers. Mama Beth, these are for you from all of us kids. We picked them because Papa Daniel said you like flowers, and we wanted to say thank you for being the best mama ever. Beth knelt down to receive the slightly wilted bouquet, her eyes filling with tears. They're beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you. Papa Daniel, Timothy said, turning to Daniel with the serious expression he wore when something was important to him. Are you happy you're our papa, even though we're not your real children? Daniel knelt down beside Beth, gathering Timothy and the other children who had come running at the sound of voices. "Timothy, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, and I want all of you to remember it forever." The children grew quiet, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Family isn't about blood," Daniel said firmly. "It's about love. It's about choosing to care for each other every single day, no matter what. You are all my real children because I choose to love you as my own, and nothing will ever change that. Promise?" little Mary whispered. "I promise," Daniel said solemnly. "Cross my heart and hope to die." That night, after all the children were tucked safely in their beds, Beth and Daniel sat on their porch swing, watching the stars come out over the Colorado plains. "No regrets?" Daniel asked, echoing the question he'd asked months ago. "Only one," Beth said, surprising him. "What's that?" Beth turned in his arms, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I regret that it took so long for us to find each other," well, Daniel said, pulling her closer for a kiss that tasted of forever. "We have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time." And as their children slept peacefully inside the house that love had built, Beth knew that sometimes the best families weren't born, they were chosen. One heart at a time,